If you think that volume training is taking the easy way out when it comes to the acquisition of muscle and strength, you are not someone who is to be taken seriously. So let me start with a claim that keeps popping up that the reason nobody does it is because it's hard. Now, when I use that as an example of why I don't believe it's the most effective, the fact that nobody good does it, I got a bunch of comments saying, well, the average person doesn't want to work that hard, or they're comfortable, or they train for pleasure, whatever. It's too hard for the average person. I don't care what the average person does. Like, why would I use what low-level lifters do as a sign of what's effective? Like, if every new lifter was doing HIIT, is that a sign that it's good? No, it's meaningless. I'm talking about what the best performers do. Now, any one best performer, we can't really use that as a great example. It's also why we can't really use Dorian or Menser, because there's always the chance that other factors, whether it's genetics, environment, PED use, or all of those together, kind of rendered which training method they were using not really that important. But what we can do is look over the last 150 years of sporting and lifting culture and find a census. We can find themes and patterns of what the best coaches, the best performers tend to do. We have all kinds of anecdote. Anecdote is not useless. In a community, it's how we share information and get closer and closer to finding out what works. Is it as perfect as a cherried out double-blind study in a physics laboratory? No, it's not. But when you have a culture that shares information, over time that information collects, you tend to preserve what works. You tend to eliminate things that don't work. And that's going to be at its absolute highest when there are the most stakes, when people have the most skin in the game. So talking about the best performers, nobody good. It's not just that most, nobody good implements high intensity principles. So if you're running a $1 billion sporting franchise and there was a clear-cut, obvious reason to believe that you could save your athletes from getting injured, you can prepare them for the season, improve their physicality, you can do all of these things and do it in less time, everybody would be jumping on that. Somebody would have used it, it would have been a game changer, and then that would have been industry standard. But nobody does that. Why does nobody do that? Because athletes actually have to temper themselves to the thing that they're trying to do. They have to temper themselves to high force production. They have to temper themselves to recruiting a lot of motor units all at once, to moving quickly. And you're not going to do that with very, very, very light loads done very, very, very slowly, because time under tension is a magic principle that is so important and effective that you should optimize that at the expense of everything else. If you do that with your athlete, you will have time wasted doing something that is non-specific to their sport, and they will come in for the specific stuff wildly unprepared. You can apply that same thing to Olympic lifting. You can apply that same thing to powerlifting. Now, the idea that it's hard means that people aren't doing it because it's just too brutal. Well, first of all, if it's too brutal for pro athletes, it's not appropriate for recreational lifters whatsoever. So why are you trying to sell it to them? Like, if pro bodybuilders don't want to do this just because it's too brutal, how in the hell does that make it appropriate for Joe Blow? It doesn't. That doesn't make any sense. Now, it's not too hard for pro bodybuilders because volume in bodybuilding is fucking brutal. Just like Jay says, people misunderstand high intensity because they haven't done it right. They don't know how difficult it is. I could say the same thing about volume. Most physique and bodybuilding guys get to failure anyways in training. Failure is a bad definition because there's a bunch of different ways to do it. If you do failure with lightweight with a very slow tempo, that's different than if you do it with heavier weight, with swinging movements, and then going into forced reps and drop sets like some of the other guys did. You can look at somebody like Jay Cutler who uses a lot of volume, and you can see that as his reps slow, he gets assisted reps. Well, that's a form of going past the point where you otherwise would have failed. Even if he doesn't actually reach momentary muscular failure, he's still more fatigued, more stimulated than he would be with a straight set. And he does that for many, many, many sets. So it's all different. So the idea of failure being one thing doesn't really hold up. Anyways, you can look at what Mike Israetel has people do on his YouTube channel in run-of-the-mill bodybuilding leg workouts. They're absolutely fucking horrible. You can look at what Tom Platz has people do. You can look at what Juji Mufu does in his home gym. He had one, I forget the guy's name, but it was kind of an older, stockier dude who had him do this just scorched earth leg workout. It started out with leg extensions to and beyond failure using forced reps, forced eccentrics. It was absolutely brutal. Then they went into their squat workout. I've seen many bodybuilders do things like this where failure is part and parcel of their volume workout as a whole. Now, taking away from that, going into strength work. Why don't good strength athletes, Olympic lifters, power lifters do this in the off season? Because it's too hard. Anybody who's ran through high volume powerlifting training, anybody who's analyzed what the Bulgarians did as far as maxing multiple times a day, every day, accruing literally dozens of missed reps. You could call that a high intensity approach because they're working up to top singles, but the number of attempts, they certainly didn't stop at one. They did dozens, if not hundreds, throughout the entire week. Look at Smolov is a program. Look at any Shako program. These are things that are absolutely crushing, and they're not based off training to failure. They're based off doing a lot of work with your chosen skill. And that in and of itself serves as a nasty developmental tool, and it's fucking brutal. So anybody that wants to paint volume work like it's the easy way out is an idiot. I don't go to the insult first very often. And usually when I do, I church them up a little bit more. If you think that volume training is taking the easy way out when it comes to the acquisition of muscle and strength, you are not someone who is to be taken seriously. You have not been around the block. You are very limited in your experience and your understanding of how the best performers actually put together world-class packages. Even what strongmen do, a run-of-the-mill strongman contest is gonna have something like a death medley where you move through these explosive movements into like heavier carry movements into something like a sled drag, because no matter how torched you are, you can also always do a sled drag, and we'll do them for multiple run-throughs, even if we're torched after the first one. Similarly with stone loading. I remember doing stone loading for sets of 12. I remember doing EMOMs. I remember doing density work. We don't just deadlift for a set of 10. We deadlift for time, which means we stop and start as needed. So weight is higher and density is really, really high. These protocols are done in the context of repeated practice, and in no way, shape, or form is it somehow the easy way out compared to doing a couple of exercises for one set. That is absolutely absurd.